Live television has given us some of the most unforgettable moments in history. I'm Nathan Cole, looking at live broadcasts that captured moments never meant to be seen. From a woman crushed at a hometown movie premiere in front of her favorite actors, to a father collapsing just steps from a finish line, right before the live feed could cut to commercial. It was October 18th, 2014, inside Sacramento's movie theater. If you've ever been to a busy hometown event in an old theater, you know how it feels. The room is packed shoulder to shoulder for a local documentary premiere. News cameras are moving around, and everyone is there to support a neighborhood filmmaker. Sitting right in the front row was 33-year-old Alyssa Green, a beloved fourth-grade teacher from Elk Grove who won her ticket through a radio contest. She wasn't rich or well-connected. She was just a passionate educator who loved movies and was genuinely excited to support a local film made right in Sacramento. Now, behind the scenes, the theater crew was under a ton of pressure. Because local stations were broadcasting live, the producers wanted the stage to look Hollywood expensive. You know, something involving a massive overhead display with fake steel beams, heavy props, extra lighting, and framed panels. But here's the problem. The theater was old, the ceiling had a history of leaks, and there was already uneven plaster right above the front row. In fact, based on the reports I looked into, 2 workers actually brought up concerns about the extra weight. But, as we see so often in these kinds of stories, the warning was treated as a hassle. The display had already been featured in press photos, and nobody wanted the embarrassment of tearing it down. For the first 40 minutes, everything seemed fine. Actors came out, the director did interviews, and fans were holding up their phones. Alyssa was so close, she could probably see the dust in the stage lights. In a video recovered from her phone later on, you can actually hear these sharp popping sounds while the lead actor is talking. But in a loud room like that, most people just assumed it was a bad speaker or a microphone clipping. Then, things went wrong fast. A TV camera caught one of the frame panels vibrating. A stagehand looked up just as a bracket tore loose from the ceiling with a loud, metallic crack. Moments later, the first section crashed onto the edge of the stage, sending actors scrambling backward. A lighting fixture shattered on impact, and as more mounting points failed, the display twisted sideways instead of dropping straight down. Most of the structure collapsed across the stage, where performers had already begun moving away. Another section crashed into an empty aisle beside the front row, but one corner of the display swung outward toward the audience as it fell. Unfortunately, that corner lined up almost perfectly with Alyssa's seat. I can't even imagine what was going through her head, but Alyssa had less than a second to react. Her phone jerked upward, catching a quick, blurry shot of metal, dust, and ceiling debris before the recording stopped. People there said the impact was immediate and incredibly heavy. An aluminum truss section and part of the decorative framing struck Alyssa directly, pinning her between her seat and the stage barrier. Nearby audience members were knocked from their seats by debris, while 2 people suffered cuts from shattered lighting glass. But Alyssa was the only person trapped beneath the heaviest portion of the structure. A few people rushed forward and tried to lift the debris, but it was tangled in cables and lighting equipment. The air quickly filled with plaster dust, making it difficult to see what had happened. Emergency services were called immediately as producers cut the live broadcast. Firefighters arrived several minutes later and used stabilization equipment and hydraulic lifting tools to safely remove debris from around Alyssa. Sadly, by the time paramedics reached her, she didn't have a pulse. They rushed her to the hospital, but there was nothing doctors could do. In total, 6 people were treated for non-life-threatening injuries, including cuts, bruises, and minor fractures caused by falling debris and the chaotic evacuation. The coroner later reported that Alyssa died from blunt force trauma. The falling structure caused catastrophic injuries to her head and chest. Investigators later concluded that the injuries were unsurvivable. Investigators later discovered the display had been anchored into non-structural ceiling framing and exceeded the mounting system's load limits. The final report blamed excessive weight, improper installation, and ignored safety concerns. After a lengthy investigation, prosecutors filed involuntary manslaughter charges against the lead contractor and site foreman. The theater never reopened and was eventually demolished. It drives me crazy how cutting corners can destroy an innocent life. And this next story out of Pittsburgh is another example of a hidden oversight costing someone everything. It was May 14, 2015 in Pittsburgh. Down by the Monongahela River, a huge crowd of locals, TV crews, and city officials are hanging out and chatting. Everyone is excited to celebrate the opening of a new walking bridge. It was something the community had been waiting for many years now. At the center of all this excitement was 67-year-old Harold Fitzgerald. He wasn't a politician, but many people in the community knew him as someone who spent years supporting local improvement projects and neighborhood initiatives. He wasn't the type to just cut a check either. According to my research, he actually showed up on the ground to help. To Harold, this bridge was deeply personal. He used his own wealth to jumpstart the funding to finally link two communities cut off by old railroad tracks. He attended the planning meetings and regularly walked the construction site. His friends said he viewed this bridge as his life's crowning achievement, the perfect legacy to leave his city. On the morning of the dedication, local news stations are setting up to broadcast the ribbon cutting live. Harold is standing on a decorative overlook platform right at the entrance of the bridge, alongside contractors, engineers, and reporters. The platform was built specifically to give the media and guests a better view, but what nobody in that crowd realized was something had gone seriously wrong. During construction, the overlook platform was modified to accommodate extra media equipment and guests. Investigators later discovered that several connection bolts had never been properly tightened to specification. Workers had raised concerns about movement during testing, but the issue wasn't addressed before the ceremony. To make matters worse, the overlook had been designed for only a small number of visitors and photographers. On the day of the dedication, far more people crowded onto the platform than engineers had anticipated. As the ceremony started, several witnesses later recalled that the project superintendent appeared unusually concerned and repeatedly glanced toward the overlook's support connections beneath the platform. And with how these events go, people are chatting, cameras are everywhere, and nobody pays attention to one stressed-out guy. Harold steps up to the ribbon, and reporters crowd in close to get their shot. It's 10:17 a.m. Harold cuts the ribbon and takes that big, symbolic first step forward. 8 other officials immediately step up right behind him. Then, one side of the platform suddenly dropped several inches. Witnesses later described hearing a loud metallic pop, followed by a series of sharp cracking sounds from underneath the deck. Most of the officials instinctively stumbled backward toward the bridge entrance as the structure tilted toward the river. Naturally, Harold reaches out to grab the railing to steady himself. Unfortunately, he was standing closest to the section experiencing the greatest movement. The news cameras catch all of this, but instead of supporting him, the railing connection tore away from the platform. Witnesses heard another metallic crack before a section of railing and decking broke free. Harold lost his balance and fell through the opening. Several nearby officials were thrown to the deck during the collapse. One city employee suffered a broken wrist, while 3 others were treated for cuts and minor injuries. But Harold was the only person positioned directly beside the failed railing section. Witnesses watched him plunge into the river as part of the collapsed railing and decking fell after him. Emergency services were called immediately. Within minutes, firefighters and river rescue personnel entered the water and began searching beneath the collapsed debris. Divers eventually located Harold trapped beneath twisted sections of railing and decking that had fallen into the river with him. Investigators later determined that the debris pinned Harold underwater before rescuers could reach him. The medical examiner concluded that he survived the initial fall, but was unable to free himself from the wreckage. His official cause of death was drowning. Months later, engineers determined that improperly torqued connection bolts and excessive crowd loading triggered the partial collapse. Investigators also found that inspection records had been signed off on before critical work was completed. Following a lengthy investigation, prosecutors charged the lead contractor and site inspector with involuntary manslaughter and reckless endangerment. The bridge remained closed for nearly 2 years while engineers rebuilt and retested the structure. It's incredibly frustrating when bad paperwork lets down someone like Harold. But up next, we see how those exact same clerical errors can happen in the aviation world with tragic results. If you're finding these stories as eye-opening as I do, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out, and it makes sure you won't miss any of our upcoming episodes. It was June 23, 2016, in Dayton, Ohio. A clear summer afternoon had drawn thousands of spectators to the annual air show. As the event's final flight approached, the crowd turned its attention toward the runway. The woman everyone came to see was 58-year-old Diane Rosie Marsh. She'd spent over 30 years flying military planes before moving into civilian air shows. And if you talk to anyone who knew her, they'd tell you the exact same thing. She was rock solid, just calm, incredibly disciplined, and really hard to rattle. Flying was her entire life, and this flight, this was supposed to be her big send-off before she finally slowed down to spend time with her husband and grandkids. Earlier that morning, ground crews were rushing to prepare both the air show and a concert scheduled for later that evening. Several temporary lighting towers were erected near the concert area after the pilots had already completed their site familiarization flights and safety inspections. During setup, one tower was relocated farther from the concert staging area to improve sightlines for evening spectators. The new position remained outside the primary aerobatic display area, but it now sat near the edge of a low-altitude transit corridor used by performers while entering and exiting certain maneuvers. The relocation was approved through an incomplete change request that never reached the flight operations team. As a result, the tower's updated location was never reflected in the final obstacle briefing package distributed to pilots that morning. Nobody intentionally ignored the problem. The information simply never reached the people who needed it most. And I think that's what makes accidents like this so frustrating. The disaster isn't caused by one reckless decision. It's caused by several small communication failures. Diane's big finale featured a low-altitude inverted pass. It was her signature move, something she'd performed hundreds of times throughout her career. But when you're flying upside down that close to the ground, there is almost no margin for error. According to her briefing materials, the flight path remained clear of obstacles. The first few minutes of the show were perfect. Cameras followed her through a series of climbs and rolls, while thousands of spectators watched from below, and local television stations carried the performance live across the region. For me, it looked like the kind of flight a pilot would be proud to end a career with. Then, Diane lined up for the inverted pass, accelerating to roughly 260 miles per hour. Witnesses said the aircraft looked completely stable, and video footage later confirmed that assessment. The problem wasn't pilot error. It was that an obstacle now existed in a location where Diane had no reason to expect one. A second later, the aircraft's right wingtip struck the upper section of the temporary lighting tower. It happened so quickly that many spectators initially thought it was part of the demonstration, but it wasn't. The collision tore away part of the wingtip and damaged the aircraft's right aileron. Fragments of metal scattered across the airfield as the airplane immediately rolled to the right. Investigators later determined that Diane attempted to recover immediately after the strike, but she was simply too low to regain control. The aircraft slammed into the runway, rupturing fuel lines and triggering a fire. The crash unfolded live on television, leaving viewers watching in shock before broadcasters quickly cut away from the wreckage and shifted coverage to emergency responders. Emergency crews rushed to the wreckage within seconds, and rescue vehicles arrived in less than 2 minutes. 3 spectators suffered minor injuries from falling debris, while Diane sustained unsurvivable injuries in the crash. What investigators uncovered later was honestly heartbreaking to me. The final report found that a communication breakdown kept the tower's new location out of the pilot's final safety briefing. Diane wasn't brought down by bad weather or mechanical failure. She was flying through airspace she believed was clear. Following the accident, airshow organizers adopted stricter procedures for approving temporary structures near active flight areas. At her family's request, several broadcasters stopped airing the crash footage and instead focused on her decades-long aviation career. Losing a pro like Diane right at her retirement is truly the worst thing to happen to anyone, but the next case will be as heartbreaking as this one. It was September 8, 2018, in Shasta County, California. Fire crews had been battling a major wildfire for nearly 2 weeks, and conditions finally seemed to be improving. The afternoon was dry and smoky, and officials scheduled a media briefing at a staging area near a recently secured section of the fire perimeter that was considered safe for reporters and support personnel. Handling the briefing was Cal Fire Captain Eva Morris Ruiz. At 45, she was a 22-year veteran who refused to spend her career behind a desk. She preferred being out with the crews, and younger firefighters respected her because she understood exactly what they were facing. If you ask me, she's exactly the kind of leader you'd want when things go wrong. Around lunchtime, television crews and reporters began arriving. Several local stations planned to carry portions of the briefing live as officials prepared to provide an update on the wildfire response. The crews set up near the staging area, which sat beside a previously burned section of ground and a cleared fire road designed to act as a safety zone. It felt secure. Some meteorologists had mentioned the possibility of changing winds later in the afternoon, but nothing suggested immediate danger. For most of the briefing, everything appeared normal. The active fire remained well beyond the perimeter, and smoke continued moving away from the gathering. But here's the part that always gets to me. When you watch the footage later, you can see small warning signs. While Eva was speaking during the live broadcast, a few firefighters in the background suddenly turned toward a nearby ridge. Several observers later reported seeing isolated embers drifting across an area that had been clear only minutes earlier. Then the wind shifted. Investigators later determined the wind shifted far faster than crews anticipated, carrying embers across containment lines and igniting dry vegetation near the staging area. As reporters abandoned their equipment and firefighters directed evacuations, 2 freelance videographers became separated from the group. According to witnesses, Eva immediately ran toward them and guided them toward an escape route, but conditions deteriorated rapidly. Investigators later believed a developing fire whirl intensified the flames and scattered burning debris across the area. Within seconds, Eva and the 2 videographers disappeared behind a wall of smoke and ash. Firefighters could not safely enter until conditions eased several minutes later. Both videographers were eventually located alive, but suffering from serious burn injuries. Several firefighters were also treated for smoke exposure during the rescue effort. Eva was found nearby. Paramedics immediately began treatment and requested an air ambulance, but her condition was critical. The medical findings later revealed that Eva suffered extensive burns. However, investigators determined that her fatal injuries were primarily caused by inhalation of superheated gases and smoke while she was attempting to help the trapped videographers. The thermal damage to her airway was so severe that she could not be stabilized. Personally, I believe this case is a harsh reminder of how unpredictable wildfires really are. You can have experienced crews, detailed forecasts, and carefully planned safety zones, and it still might not be enough when conditions change unexpectedly. The investigation concluded that a rapid wind shift allowed embers to cross containment lines and ignite fuels near the staging area, showing how quickly wildfire conditions can overwhelm even established safety plans. Following the incident, several fire agencies revised procedures for media briefings near active wildfire zones and expanded requirements for evacuation planning around staging areas. Eva died a hero trying to beat the elements, and in this final story, we look at how a hidden internal medical issue can catch a well-meaning runner by surprise halfway across the world. On October 28, 2017, the city marathon brought thousands of people out to the streets of Jeonju, South Korea. It was a surprisingly warm, sunny Saturday for late October, and the energy in the crowd was amazing. Everyone was cheering, local TV crews were broadcasting live, and the whole city just felt alive. One of the runners that day was Dennis Choi, 52, a high school history teacher known for his patience and dedication to the community. He was running that day for a deeply personal reason. A few years earlier, he had lost his teenage daughter to a congenital heart condition and turned that grief into a fundraising campaign for pediatric heart research. This marathon was the centerpiece of that effort. That morning, local TV crews followed his progress, and Dennis told them he had just one goal: finish the race. As the day warmed up, temperatures climbed higher than expected, and medical teams began warning runners about heat stress. Dennis ignored the signs and kept pushing, maintaining a pace that was likely too aggressive for the conditions. By mile 22, some volunteers along the route noticed he looked exhausted, far more tired than many of the runners around him. He was breathing heavily and constantly wiping sweat from his face. A few volunteers actually encouraged him to slow down and check in at the next medical station, but Dennis declined and continued running. By the time he hit the final kilometer, witnesses said his body looked like it was running on determination alone. His shoulders slumped, his stride shortened, and other runners began passing him. But the crowd recognized him from the morning news coverage. coverage. The closer he got to the stadium, the louder the cheering became. When he finally stepped onto the stadium track, the cameras locked onto him. Investigators who later reviewed the footage noticed that he stumbled slightly as soon as he reached the track surface. He kept reaching toward his chest. He wasn't really running anymore. It was more of a slow jog. Two medical volunteers near the edge of the track noticed and started moving toward him. Again, Dennis waved them away. He just wanted to finish. With about 400 meters left, things took a turn. His legs began moving unevenly. Spectators nearby said his face suddenly became pale. He slowed to a walk, and then his right foot caught the track. His knees buckled. He fell straight forward. Investigators later noted that Dennis made no attempt to break his fall with his hands, a finding consistent with a sudden loss of consciousness. Everything happened fast after that. Race officials rushed onto the track, and CPR began within seconds. Paramedics arrived about 3 minutes later and worked on him for nearly 20 minutes, but Dennis was pronounced dead later that day. An autopsy revealed previously undiagnosed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The physical stress of the marathon triggered a fatal cardiac arrhythmia, causing sudden cardiac arrest. The fall didn't kill him. His heart stopped first. When the city reviewed the incident, investigators determined that race officials and medical personnel had followed established procedures. Medical assistance had been available throughout the course, and emergency response times were consistent with race safety plans. For me, that's the hardest part of this story. Everyone involved did what they were supposed to do. There wasn't an obvious mistake to blame. Sometimes a tragedy happens because of a condition nobody knows exists until it's too late. In the months that followed, race organizers strengthened health disclosure guidelines and education about hidden cardiovascular risks. Dennis never got to cross the finish line he worked so hard for, but there is a silver lining. After the news broke, his fundraising campaign exploded. Donations poured in from across the country, raising far more money for pediatric heart research than Dennis could have collected alone. He didn't finish the race, but he absolutely finished his mission.